So I grew up in Corvallis, Oregon, about an hour and a half south of Portland. It's a fairly small town, and I always loved to build and make things and draw. And sometime when I was about in middle school, someone said, hey, you might be interested in architecture. And that was really a pivotal moment because, you know, up till then, I really didn't know what that meant or what that was. And I think a real challenge growing up in a smaller town was finding resources and people who knew much about architecture. You know, there was only a couple architects in my town. So that was definitely an interesting kind of challenge, trying to reach out and call up architects, talk to them, learn what I could. I went to college in Washington, D.C. at Catholic University. I got my 4-year Bachelor's of Architecture degree. And then I went to graduate school at the University of Texas in Austin and got my master's degree. Stayed in Texas and worked for a few years, and then moved to Portland, so back to Oregon, where I have worked at 2 different firms. I chose to move over to Mahlum about 4 years ago because I was so impressed with the dedication and the type of work that we do.
My name is Octavio Gutierrez, and I also work with Abby at Mahlum, and I grew up in Southern California, just east of Los Angeles. You know, big family, all first-generation college students, and I studied my undergraduate architecture at MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, out in Boston. You know, wanted to explore something new, and I actually didn't realize that I wanted to be an architect until probably middle to high school. I had kind of other things going on in my mind, and went back and forth between other professions, thought about law for a while, and then, you know, got into MIT, which is a great engineering school, and thought I should probably study engineering. And I started off as a civil engineering major, and right off the bat, my first professor, who wound up to be a great mentor, saw that I really had a bigger passion for architecture. And MIT had a great architecture program, so he steered me in that direction and really helped me find my way through that. So I graduated from MIT and moved back to Los Angeles, and actually worked for a contractor doing construction management for 3 years. And it was a great experience to, you know, get to see how buildings come together from the other side of the table, as we like to say. And then after about 3 years, decided it was time to get my master's degree, and moved north up to Berkeley. Go Bears. Got my master's there in architecture, spent about 14 years in the Bay Area, doing a lot of work with higher ed institutions, so universities and colleges. And then moved up to Portland about 4 years ago to join Abby and the Mahlum team, really for the same reasons that Abby described, because Mahlum really offered an opportunity to get engaged with communities and get engaged with our clients, basically from the moment they start school in those K to 12 programs, all the way through college, all the way through our healthcare, and all the way through, you know, assistive care down the end of the road. So I felt like Mahlum was covering the full aspect of the human experience, and I really was drawn to that, and it resonated with my approach to architecture.
So we've broken this into kind of high school, what you can be doing now to pass through college, and then what it actually takes to get to the final stage of licensure. We've included information for architect and interior designer. They're similar, actually, in terms of the approach that one takes, but there's slight differences in terms of the schools and things like that. I remember when I was in high school, people said, oh, if you want to be an architect, you have to be really good at math. And I would say it's not untrue, but it's not, we don't actually do that much math in our daily work. We have a lot of engineers who work with us who really do a lot more number crunching than we do. So certainly if math is not your favorite subject, I wouldn't let that deter you. What I would say is, you know, take classes that interest you. You know, we write, we speak, we think about complicated ideas related to science, related to business, related to all sorts of things. So any of those subjects are good primers for working as an architect. I would also say get, you know, anything you can do to get your hands on making things, whether it's drafting, drawing, hand drawing, photography, sewing, just creating is really important. And maybe the most important thing you can be doing at this point. And then, you know, if you have the ability to get involved in extracurricular activities, but, you know, maybe you volunteer with Habitat for Humanity or, you know, play around with some of the computer programs that are available. Those are all great ways just to dip your toe into architecture. In terms of the school options, in order to become a licensed architect, so kind of the end game, if that's your goal, you need to get a degree from a professional school that is accredited. So you can do that in two ways. One, you can just get your 5-year Bachelor's of Architecture degree from an accredited school, and that will be your professional degree. Or you can go to basically any school and get a 4-year degree. That degree could be in architecture, or it could be in anything, geology, history. And then if you've done that, then you would go to a graduate program, which needs to be an accredited program. So there's different reasons to do either route. If you're not quite sure about architecture, then go get a degree in something else, something that really interests you, from a school that really interests you, that's the right size, the right fit for you, and then think about graduate school for architecture. If you are certain you want to be an architect, then to get to a school that has an accredited program. Doesn't mean you won't change your mind during that program, but at least you'll be at a school that has the right program.
The Garfield Theater is a project just across the Columbia River in Washington. It's in Camas, and it's a renovation of an old historic theater. So back in the early 1910s, Garfield High School, which is the larger structure here on the left, was built, and they, over the time in the 30s, added this theater wing, which is in the center, and then continued to add classrooms. And over time, the Garfield High School piece was demolished in the 70s, and then the building kind of fell into a state of disrepair and was having some perceived structural issues where it wouldn't necessarily withstand a major seismic event. So the building has been sitting pretty much alone for the last 10 years, but it's got some great historic character to it. And part of our task has been to really help bring this theater back to its kind of former glory in terms of being able to serve the community as a performance space, as a meeting space. You can see here on the left what the theater looked like before it started undergoing its renovation. And on the right, you can see, the artifacts of different years and classes of students that leave their mark after their performance. So there were a lot of cool little gems like that that we uncovered while walking through the project that are going to get preserved as part of the renovation. But really the goal of this project was to reopen it, make it safe, make it warm, make it dry, and make it usable for the community again. This image here shows what the theater looked like just before we started construction. So the main theater structure is essentially this taller piece in the middle, and then everything else you see is support space, so classrooms, restrooms, a really convoluted old entry. So we really wanted to rethink the way this whole building was approached from an arrival sequence, from an accessibility perspective, and really from making this feel more welcoming to the community. So as part of that, we developed a design process that started with a very broad engagement with the community and took it through design. And this project is now in construction, and we're going to show you a few of those steps along the way, starting with a schedule that really talks about what a design process looks like.
All right, so this is something maybe more detailed than you were expecting to see, but what we try to show with this is just the length of time it takes for a project from the early ideas and the first meetings all the way through to construction. So you can see with the orange bar, we called it pre-design and programming. There was actually a phase of this even earlier in 2017 where we met with the community and really engaged with them to understand their interests in the theater. One of the side benefits to architecture, and I've seen some questions about, do you have to specialize or how do you know what kind of architect you want to be? One of the coolest things about architecture is you end up getting to learn all sorts of information about every project that you work on. So like I once worked on, there was a question about what's the most complicated project you ever did. I once worked on a Federal Reserve Bank, which had to be blast-proof, bomb-proof, bulletproof. It had, a firing range inside of it. It was just a crazy set of specifics that I've never ever dealt with again in another project, but it was very interesting. You learn a lot on the job. So with the theater, we learned a lot from all the different people who use the theater. So if you've been involved in performance, you understand that there are musicians who will perform there, there's theater actors, there's dancers, there's musical theater, and each of those productions has a different need and different sets of requirements. And so we had to really understand what those were. They also wanted to be able to use the space as a community learning space that could serve like for preschool classes or classes for seniors. So we had to make spaces that could work both ways. So all of those conversations happened in this orange phase. Once we were pretty sure we knew what the building should be, and made sure we had the funding in place. They were paying for this project with some bond money that was basically paid through the voters for the Kansas area. And then we started the design phase. You see it annotated here as SD, DD, and CD. That's schematic design, design development, and construction documents. You can kind of think of that like when you write a paper. Schematic design is almost like the outline. It's like, here's all the big pieces that we think are going to happen and where they should be. Design development is like writing that first draft and really working through what it should be. And then construction documents is publishing that final draft and getting all the details worked out. So that ends up being a set of drawings as well as a set of written directions, specifications we call them, for the contractor. In this case, the project then was put out to bid. A number of contractors studied the drawings and put forth a price that they said they could build the building for. Once the contractor was selected, then construction starts. And as you can see, that's going to take close to a year to do all the activities that we just described.
So this is again in that very early schematic design phase where you're outlining how the space is going to come together. So we're talking about big blocks of space. So the house, in orange being the theater space where you've got your seats and your stage. The lobby is where you walk through to access the theater. The yellow space is a support space. So here, we're looking at some very basic 3D massing diagrams that are just really to understand how those pieces come together, both two-dimensionally and three-dimensionally. And very shortly after that, we can start taking these very, rough sketches, and we did these by hand as well. We just happen to have these digital. We can start to look at what those look like in terms of actual floor plans and how spaces come together. And these are all hand-drawn, just really understanding quickly, sketching how we think that these spaces come together, what the entry might start to look like. Again, very loose in that early schematic design phase. And as we get into the later phases in design development and construction documents, it's really time to start clarifying that intent and clarifying those instructions that we want to give to the contractor. So here, we decided we needed to develop some very clear diagrams that showed what was going to be removed. So everything in this darkest pink color was going to be removed from the building. We were going to, take out an old wing, take out the really convoluted entry that wasn't historic. And there was a piece of structure that housed restrooms that was in a really bad location and was not accessible. So showing what we wanted to remove and also showing what we wanted to put back on. So the new construction portion. So here you can see that we wanted to really rethink the entrance, give it a more gracious ramp and a larger prominence on the corner. We wanted to reopen that south facade, put in all the new windows that would make this feel much more like the historic element, and then create brand new restrooms that are, accessible, inclusive, just much better location for them moving forward, and just refresh the theater. There wasn't a whole lot to do within the theater itself. The users thought it had great acoustics. Abby and I have different opinions on that, but they really didn't want to do too much with the interior. So we said, that's great. It's probably a bigger expense than the project can support. But here we have, one of our teams was looking at one of our projects in virtual reality. So once we've modeled everything in Revit, which is a three-dimensional modeling software, it's very easy for us to give everything in a material quality. If it's wood, we want it to show up as wood. We can give it that material quality. We can start to make those spaces feel like they will when they're built. And then we can put on the VR goggles and start walking around and bump into walls and trip over things. And it's a great way to get our clients and our contractors and everyone else who's engaged in this process to get them on board with the project, to really sign off on how we're proceeding with the work. This is a VR session we did at the end of DD to basically get final sign off from everyone on the materials and what we were proposing. So these are some views that we can generate from Revit. We can actually do full renderings through a plugin for Revit called Enscape. And we were able to generate these views at the end of design to show the community what their new space would look like. So this is what that new south elevation would look like. And then that new entry, again, trying to give it more of a presence to the community. And then when you walk into that lobby, we wanted this to feel much more open. Currently, there's really not that many windows into the lobby because there's a series of classrooms right in the center space. So we wanted to open this up entirely to make this feel much more welcoming and much more open. and really allow the community to use this for multiple functions. So this could also be, another performance area. It could be a community classroom space. We wanted this to feel really flexible and not just be a lobby when it's not being used for performances. And then the last view is just that view of the theater. So from the stage, we were proposing to refresh all the seats with new fabrics and give everything a new coat of paint and just repair anything that needed repair without really making too many wholesale changes to the theater itself. You can see where, the portion of the east building has been demolished. They've opened up the new windows that we're about to put back in. The toilet tower, as we affectionately call it, has been demolished. I think if we swing around, on the interior, they've started framing the new flooring. So as I mentioned, one of the big components of this project was to make it accessible for wheelchairs. And by reframing the entire floor within the theater, it allows us to bring wheelchair users essentially throughout the entire theater instead of essentially at the top or the bottom. So, and last, one of the things that I love about construction is that it's a great time to discover where your documents might have missed something, or when you discover something in construction that needs to be resolved very quickly and creatively. So this was an issue that came up on a construction site where they started demolishing a portion of the east building and realized that there was a concrete wall extending further than anyone had expected. So we had a few of our team members on site figuring it out in real time, scribbling on a piece of wall that was still standing before any more of that wall was removed. So on my screen now, I have our Garfield Theater project open in a program called Revit. Revit is an Autodesk program. So if you use Tinkercad or AutoCAD, it's the same manufacturer or same software developer. And Revit is unique. I don't know if you all will be learning Revit in your class. I think the last class we spoke to said they were. But Revit lets you model in 3 dimensions. So it just like CAD, you can draw and draft in 2 dimensions, and everything you see here can be represented in 2 dimensions. I just popped into a 3D view to show you what this looks like in 3D. But what's great about this is you can see that, some of the stuff that's on here is not our model, it's actually our consultant models. So our engineers have told us where they'd like, air handlers on the roof, where, we need to run conduit for cables to support antennas. One of my favorite features about Revit is the ability to really get in here and start slicing the building any which way to explore, how things need to be resolved. So here I've cut the building, right through the restrooms. So you can see some restroom stalls. You can see how the ductworks are thankfully fitting above the ceiling, so they're not poking below the ceiling. So that means that got coordinated. But really, this allows us to, cut the building in any which way and really understand how pieces are coming together and spin around and walk through it. One of the best plugins for Revit is Enscape. So this is Revit, and from Revit, we can very easily just open Enscape. And this lets us see what's being modeled, with all the finishes and all the colors that we've applied in real time. So we can toggle between the model and Enscape and essentially walk through our building at any point of design to see how things are shaping up. So you can see there's a light here that's shown or glowing over this concrete wall. You can look up, you can give yourself the ability to fly if you really want to. So you can kind of hover over spaces. So here I can get us up into this gallery space and really take a look back at this lobby area below and understand, do we like what we're seeing? Are the views what we're expecting? What are the potentials for the space, the way it's being designed? So this is really cool. I love it. You can walk through walls with sound effects, pow, pow, if you'd like. I'm probably underneath the seat somewhere, and now I'm back in the theater. So again, this just gives us a better way of understanding space. And just like we can be on the interior, I can walk back on the ground and kind of get us back at grade level. And I'm gonna use my ability to walk through walls and take us outside because I think it's gonna be pretty cool out there too. So this was not something we had at our disposal even like 10 years ago. I mean, this has been just how quickly the software develops. So I think when you all go to school, you'll probably be learning some really cool new tools and toys that we haven't even dreamt of yet. So I think that's also a pretty exciting thing about architecture. It's always evolving.